Hi, Susan here from Beyond Your Childhood. Thank you for joining me for episode 10 of Susan Raw. The last episode, I talked about the Field of Dreams, this field of 6-foot white flags blowing in the breeze, and how I wanted so badly to speak on behalf of this nonprofit, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And it did take me a year. And what I realized was I needed to find a way not to make it so personal that I would become emotional. So, and I did. I realized I had to flip it to third person. So, and as crazy as this sounds, I did it at the headquarters of the bank where I was a senior officer. Yeah. And looking back, that took a lot of guts. So I remember having a microphone in my hand and notes in the other, and I never looked at my notes, and my hand shook, and yet I felt no nervousness inside. It was crazy. And I basically said I grew up in a home of child abuse. I was never physically abused or sexually abused, but I witnessed my mother be abused every day of my childhood. And then I flipped it and said, this is what children who grew up in that experience. And I finished, and several things happened that I never expected. One, every senior officer that was standing in the parking lot of the bank turned around and walked away, and I was terrified. And I turned to the executive director and said, oh my gosh, they just turned around and walked away. And she said, did they know your story? And I said, of course not. Keepers of secrets, that's what we do. And she said, I think they call that shock and awe. And then a couple of other things happened I did not expect. I never saw it coming. 2 staff members of that nonprofit were physically helping a woman come over to me, and she was sobbing so hard you could hear her in the parking lot. And she came up and she wrapped her arms around me and she said, thank you so much for your courage in telling my story. I never saw it coming. And then there was another and another and another and another. And then there was this young lady I will never forget that was waiting to talk to me. And so I walked over, and her name was Angela. And I'll never forget her face. I'll never forget her. And she was wearing these dark sunglasses, and she looked at me and she thanked me for telling her story. And I told her I was sorry. And she said she was going to counseling. And she said, and she lifted her sunglasses off her head and she was crying. And she said, but you gave me hope. And I asked her how I did that. And she said, you said you forgave your parents. And indeed I had. And I did. And I explained to her, I said, you know what, keep going to counseling, good for you. But it's not like I ever went to my mother and said, you're forgiven. And my father was gone. It's just that what I learned on my journey is that if you don't forgive here and here, you will carry a load for the rest of your life. I am not one who believes my parents did the best they could. I don't. But if I didn't forgive them, for me, I wasn't going to carry that for the rest of my life. I had already carried it for 45 years. It was, without question, the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And you talk about shedding a skin. It was amazing. And I'm not asking you today to have that voice, but I hope at some point you can find the courage to know that by sharing your story is not shaming you or anybody in your life, but it might just help somebody else. I'm Susan, beyondyourchildhood.com. Join me again tomorrow for more Susan Raw. Raise your voice. Be heard.